Hello, welcome to episode 121 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson and I'm a registered nutritional therapist working with people who have IBS and SIBO all over the world. One of the diet interventions that I use with my clients is the low FODMAP diet. And today I want to talk a bit about why it might not work for you. I've done a couple of episodes this month already, just focusing on how to do the reintroductions, like is the low FODMAP good for you? And now I want to focus in on why you may not have got the result that you thought you would. The reason I've picked this topic is a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I tried low FODMAP and it didn't work. And then when I dig into it a bit more, I find some reasons why it may not have worked. As I've said many times on this podcast, it is really tricky diet to do. It's not intuitive. You can't see which foods might be high in FODMAPs just from looking at them. And it's quite tricky to work out in terms of the portion sizing. So people often go wrong. So I've got a couple of reasons around the diet and common mistakes that people make. Then there's some issues around other foods that may be causing similar issues that are nothing to do with FODMAPs. And then we'll look at alternative reasons for ongoing IBS type symptoms, and that will, pull together the episode. Just as a little reminder, 3 out of 4 people normally get some kind of benefit from going on the low FODMAP diet, but actually not everybody will. So if you're in the 1 out of 4 who didn't get any improvements, this is some of the reasons why. I'm going to start with a couple of the most common mistakes that people make that makes the diet slightly invalid or, a bit of a waste of time. So firstly, it's around really understanding the diet, as in there could be hidden or unknown FODMAPs in things that you're eating whilst you thought you were doing the restriction phase. This is very common. Even when I'm working with people and I'm giving them loads of information, lists of low FODMAP and high FODMAP foods, I'm giving them meal plans, I'm talking to them each week, they can still make mistakes because, people just eat something they weren't planning to, or maybe they just didn't realize that a certain food and they'd forgot to check. It happens. So if you're eating something without realizing that it is high FODMAP, obviously you're not going to get the full extent of the diet. It could be that you were eating something with onions in it, and onions are actually your particular trigger, and you didn't know. Commonly, it's things that might be hidden in ingredients listings. So for example, if you have a protein powder, sometimes it's sweetened with things like inulin. This is very high FODMAP, chicory and inulin, and it's often used in sugar-free products to be more healthy because it's a fibre, it's low sugar, so people like to add it in the production process. But for you, if you're trying to avoid these types of fibres, they should be removed during the restriction phase. So inulin or chicory is one type of sweetener, and also things like xylitol present in chewing gums and stuff like that. It's a high FODMAP sugar-free sweetener. Then you might be accessing the wrong information. You are looking at out-of-date information. I worked with a client recently who was eating grapes during her FODMAP restriction phase. And I've said, actually, grapes are a high FODMAP fruit. You can only have about 4 or 5 before they turn into a high FODMAP meal. And she said, no, I've looked it up. I've Googled it, and grapes are low FODMAP. So that was incorrect information that she was looking at. And that's why, unfortunately, you can't always trust blogs, recipes as well, because when FODMAP restrictions change, it takes quite a lot of effort from people who create FODMAP recipes online. And so they're not going to always update their recipes or change them, take them down every time there's some kind of new ingredients listing change. So often the recipes might be out of date, and food listings can also be out of date, and that can lead you to be eating the wrong kind of foods by mistake. Now, I mentioned there about portion sizing. So, for example, if you love grapes, you can have 3-4 grapes per meal, and that would still be low FODMAP. So you can have a small portion of them and you don't have to completely rule them out. It's really about the portion sizing, and that is the thing that's difficult to get your head around, because every fruit, vegetable, like grain, has got different portion sizing depending on the type of food to keep it within the low FODMAP restrictions. This is why you need something like the app, or you need to work with someone who really understands all the different portions and will give you the correct information. The last little mistake that people maybe make around the FODMAP diet process is FODMAP stacking. And this is where you have multiple moderate FODMAP portions within one meal, which can then turn into a high FODMAP meal. Now, this is more common in people who are maybe vegetarian or more plant-based and want a lot of variety within each meal. They like different textures. I've worked with a few people who, with sort of sensory needs, who really like to have crunchy, soft, like mixed textures within a meal. And then you're adding quite a lot of extra stuff. So normally, one of the easiest ways to do the low FODMAP diet is to just be quite plain about it. Just have plain protein, a carb, and a couple of vegetables on a plate. I know that's quite boring, but it really just does keep it easy to manage. But if you are someone who loves to have like mixed foods, you like a lot of different tastes and textures, then normally you're adding quite a lot of different foods, and it can be quite tricky to monitor that and to also keep your digestion nice and calm. So what I suggest is trying to keep it as simple as possible, and that will help you avoid FODMAP stacking, which is when you're having multiple portions of the same FODMAP within a meal that then tips the meal even to a high FODMAP. So an example of that might be you have a couple of cherry tomatoes, you have a little bit of red pepper, and maybe you have some broad beans. I don't know. They're all like moderate portions for the fructose element in FODMAP, but when you eat all of those together, plus you're having, I don't know, a little bit of beans and pulses or some pasta or something, it could easily tip into a higher FODMAP meal because of all of those different ingredients. Okay, so that's just some common mistakes with the diet. So one reason the FODMAP diet might not have worked for you is that you weren't following it exactly to the letter. And as I've explained, really understandable why, because it's tricky. Okay, the second reason why you may not find relief on the low FODMAP diet is that FODMAPs might not be your issue. It might be another type of food issue. So other common food triggers could be high histamine. So a histamine-rich diet for somebody who has histamine overload could be triggering some of the same symptoms. High histamine foods include things like aged cheeses, preserved meats, so like cheddar, blue cheese, pastrami, salami, those kind of things, plus tinned fish like tin mackerel, sardines, stuff like that, because it's aged and preserved and the histamine content of the food will go up. There are small amounts of histamine in foods like tomatoes, spinach, mushrooms, but at a much lower level and probably unlikely to cause the same issues. Histamine overload isn't necessarily driven by diet, but it is part of the consideration. Listen to episode 113 if you want to find out more about histamine intolerance, and I've done a whole episode about that. You could also have a food allergy. Something like dairy will cause problems even in a delayed way. So it's not necessarily like an allergy like peanut allergy with immediate anaphylactic response, but you could have a actual allergy to something like dairy, soy, corn. There are 12, I think, official allergens, and you may have a sensitivity to any of those. If you feel like it could be another food-related issue, it's worth going through your doctor to get a proper allergy test and get that ruled out. If you've already cut out all dairy on the low FODMAP diet, obviously you don't need to go through a dairy exclusion diet, but another alternative option is to go 100% dairy-free for 2 to 4 weeks and see if that resolves your issues, because even a small amount of dairy-containing foods may be a problem for somebody who is very sensitive. So yes, you could look at other food intolerances. The final food-related issue I wanted to talk about is that you could be messing around with fibre too much when you go on the low FODMAP diet. So one reason that you don't get any benefit from it, particularly if you have slower transit time, maybe if you have intestinal methanogen overgrowth, you have chronic constipation, is when you're removing some of the most fermentable fibres, which are high FODMAP foods, you're also potentially removing fibres that keep your gut moving. So you could end up feeling a bit constipated. Or if you're not producing enough fibre that binds the stool together and creates a healthy but formed bowel movement, then the poo is going to be too soft, too runny and too loose without that gel to stick it together. So this happens a lot where people go on a kind of Atkins or paleo type diet. So you're eating a lot of meat and salad and low fibre vegetables. Maybe lettuce, a bit of cucumber, tomatoes. These are really low fibre vegetables. They are healthy. They're great to include. I'm not saying cut them out. It's just that they are not going to be giving you the right levels of fibre. So we must keep up the fibre even though it's low FODMAP. And these kind of low FODMAP, high fibre foods are things such as green beans, you can have raspberries, you can still have a bit of banana, spinach, a bit of sweet potato, and normal white potatoes with the skin on. You just need to think about how you're going to add fibre in without tipping into a high FODMAP amount. And this is partly why it's tricky. It's not just about cutting things out. It's about making sure that you're adding enough in to keep a healthy bowel movement, because without that, you're unlikely to get to your good baseline. If you're constipated and then you go down in terms of you only having a couple of poos a week, that's not going to be a good baseline to test against. The same if you're having diarrhea, because you haven't got that gel forming structural fibre in your poo, it's going to lead to watery, fast moving stools that are going through you too fast. There's nothing to hold it there and slow it down. So we've got to keep up the fibre. So do have a think about that if that is a food related way that the FODMAP diet could not be working for you. There could be other non-food related causes of your digestive issues. The first one to mention is stress, anxiety, worry, feeling on edge the whole time. This does drastically impact your gut health and your digestive capacity. And I know it's not easy to overcome, but addressing how you're feeling and your mental health side of things can make a massive difference to your digestive problems. So sometimes people notice a clear correlation between stressful week and their digestive symptoms going haywire. You can really clearly see it, and then it's kind of obvious to you. But a lot of the time, it's not as clear cut. It doesn't always go like that in the same way. Like, it's not always immediate that you will get a reaction, and stress can build up. And so sometimes it's worth taking a step back and thinking about what you are doing in your day. You might say, I'm not stressed, and yet have zero time for yourself, no time to rest. And actually you're busy with thoughts going around your head all day. Like some people I work with, they tell me, no, I'm not stressed. I don't have stress. And yet they're working. Maybe they've got caring responsibilities. They're exercising really hard and, quite intensely, or they're dealing with some difficult emotional stress with partners or kids. They've just got so much on. Alternatively, you could have quite a quiet life, a simple life that doesn't have any of those outwardly stressful experiences, but inside you feel stressed. And it can be more difficult to admit that you feel anxious or stressed when actually there's no obvious stressful thing happening. But it doesn't necessarily have to line up. How we feel in our head and the types of thoughts we have can come from how you were brought up. It can come from how you're feeling in terms of your connection to other people. There might not be an obvious major stressor like getting divorced or losing your job, or your kids are struggling at school. Those kind of things are obviously stressful, but also people have inside worries and inside anxieties that maybe you don't even voice to anybody, but leave you in a state of physiological stress. So stress is something that will impact on your gut. It will impact on how effective dietary changes are. You can only go so far to right your digestion by changing your food. If you're not sleeping, your mind is buzzing all day and you're kind of feeling very distracted, rushing from one thing to another. That is going to impact on your digestion as much as eating something like some chickpeas. Right. So as I said, it's not easy. I don't have easy solutions, but small steps like getting outside, walking as much as you can. It's really good for you if you're able to have a little walk every day, fresh air, daylight, very helpful. Deep breathing, and I've done a whole episode on breathing for IBS with loads of different techniques and things that you can just build into your day. All right, so that is another potential reason why the FODMAP diet wouldn't work is you might be stressed. Then there are some other physical things that could be interfering with the FODMAP diet process for you. And some of these include large bowel gut dysbiosis. So what I mean by that is an overgrowth of bacteria in the large intestine that could be producing hydrogen sulfide gas. Maybe they are interfering with your digestive motility. You can have a lot of bugs in the large intestine that are giving you gas, pain, cramping, sensitivity. That can be a cause. I sort of hesitate to say dysbiosis because we don't have a defined terminology for that, like what it means, but I take it to mean you've got too many bugs in there that you don't want and probably not enough of the good ones. That happens through long-term FODMAP restriction. So if you haven't been eating fermentable fibres for a very long time, it's quite likely that your gut is a little bit messed up. See episode 119 for my review of why the low FODMAP diet could be messing up your gut. Okay, so that's one thing. You could have SIBO, that's small intestine bacterial overgrowth, which is kind of the same thing, but in the small intestine, giving you very similar symptoms to typical IBS. So it could be bloating, gas pains, sensitivity, uncomfortableness. And also some people will also get brain fog, achy joints. There are other body symptoms that might be related to it. So yeah, gut microbe issues, I would say, cannot be necessarily managed with the FODMAP diet. The FODMAP diet may reduce symptoms a bit, but it might not completely resolve the issues. So that would be one thing to think about. With SIBO, the next step is to get a SIBO breast test. Again, it's not infallible, but it is the only thing that we have. You can look at episode 103 about SIBO testing for who to test, when to test, and how to do it. Another reason why the low FODMAP diet might not work is you may have bile acid malabsorption. You can listen to episode 91 for the role of bile in IBS and SIBO. Also listen to episode 52 about bile acid malabsorption because that's really key. So basically that's your bile salts are not getting reabsorbed in the small intestine. They are getting to your large intestine where they cause urgent watery diarrhea, cramping, and this is a possible cause of your symptoms that will not necessarily be modified by reducing FODMAPs. So a possible reason why your FODMAP diet doesn't work, if you're someone who gets loose stools that are erratic and seem to come out of nowhere no matter what you eat, it's worth investigating. Also, you could have pelvic floor issues. If you're someone with constipation, then yes, reducing the FODMAPs may reduce some of the bloating, some of the fermentability and the gas production, but it won't necessarily change your muscles. So the FODMAP diet might not work if you have issues opening and closing your bowels, and that can be down to, the right time to release and open the muscles. It's quite an intricate process. If you have some pelvic floor dysfunction, which is quite common after a pregnancy or birth, but can also happen due to abuse and trauma, could happen after any kind of operation, or just issues like stress, anxiety, and worry. The tension of that sometimes can go into the pelvic floor. So many, many reasons why we may struggle to open the bowels, and The FODMAP diet won't change that, and it may ease the pressure a little bit by reducing the amount of fibre, but it won't solve the issue, won't solve the cause, which is to do with the muscles, and seeing a pelvic health physiotherapist would be a really good option to rule that out for you if you're struggling with constipation and it has not got any better since you've done the low FODMAP diet. Another similar physical reason why the low FODMAP diet might not make any changes is something called abdominophrenic dyssynergia. This is where your diaphragm, which runs along the underneath of your lungs, is mal-coordinated. I don't know how to describe it. It basically doesn't work as it should and forces your abdomen outwards, which then causes a bloating sensation. It causes distension. It's to do with the way that you're breathing, and sometimes a physical therapy can be a helpful way to get over that. Then the final reason why the low FODMAP diet might not be working for you is that you're taking something else that is affecting your digestion. So maybe too much coffee, drinking alcohol frequently, or medication. So there are certain types of medication that can upset your digestion. And I'm not suggesting that you stop taking it, but it could be worth a review with your doctor to see, is there another kind of medication that I can take that maybe doesn't give you so many side effects? Coffee, if you're having a lot of caffeine, that can really speed up the gut, increase cramping. And I know it's so difficult to give up. I would hate to give up my 1 cup of coffee per day. But for some people, even that is too much. So definitely cut down on your coffee, even though it's not a high FODMAP drink. We don't want to have too many coffees in a day. It can definitely cause gut disruption. And the same with alcohol. Alcohol is part of the FODMAP diet, and there really isn't a good alcoholic drink. But even if you were to drink neat spirits with nothing else other than some fizzy water, which would be potentially low FODMAP, it's not going to be good for your gut. So if you're drinking regularly, then maybe the FODMAP diet didn't work well for you because of the alcohol. So there is a number of reasons I hope you can see why the FODMAP diet doesn't always work for someone. It's not always because you haven't done it properly, although there are a couple of reasons at the top of the show that I said, some common mistakes that people make, but it's not always that you didn't do it properly. It could be other food reasons. It could be other physical reasons that are nothing to do with diet, that you might have had some improvement, but it hasn't really got you to where you need to go. If you have any questions about the low FODMAP diet, feel free to email me and let me know, and I can do a future episode about your question and try and include it. I'm really happy to expand on that, and if people tell me what they want more of, I can then deliver the right information. So, leaving it there for this week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Inside Knowledge. Better digestion for everyone.